Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 24, Resolution of Ice and Fire. Sirius hadn't registered Subaru's presence. She merely glared with passionate hatred at the two standing in front of Subaru, that is, Emilia and Beatrice. Subaru, what's up with her? She's not the same as before. Subaru could not hide his wavering confusion at Sirius's rage. In the short span of time since he'd encountered her, Subaru had met a relatively normal Sirius 3 times. Among those encounters, although Sirius hadn't followed any expectations common sense would bring, she was not someone irrational who was overrun by rage. In fact, she had always been attempting to justify her claims to force on others. So, the Sirius in front of them was completely foreign. She'd lost her rationality and fallen prey to rage. Putting it simply, she now seemed a perfect fit for her title of Wrath. Sirius, I could keep burning and burning you, but it wouldn't be enough, like maggots, like flies. Haha, how much do you hate me? Even in my saddest days, am I not allowed the freedom of mourning? Emilia. I don't know what you're talking about. Sirius, aha. Emilia responded fearlessly to Sirius's enraged allegations, even at Sirius's fierce reactions. She pointed the tip of her sword of ice at the crowd behind Sirius. Emilia, if you feel angry at me, I'll hear you out. After all, the sudden provocation came from us, so of course you'd be angry. However, this has nothing to do with the other people here. Please liberate them. Sirius, that's the wrong attitude. If you want to let everyone go, do it right. Of course I'll be angry. Then show me the right attitude. Apologize, repent, cry and beg for forgiveness, then let me shoot flames into your ass and scorch your internal organs away. Emilia, having my organs burned would be troublesome. So, let's settle this simply. Sirius tilted her head upon hearing Emilia's low voice. Emilia immediately twisted her upper body slightly and darted forward. Her pale wrists wielded her sword of ice as if it were weightless. The sun glistened off of the sharpened tip of the sword as she drove it toward Sirius's shoulder. Subaru, Emilia-tan? Sirius, gah. Subaru's exclamation overlapped with Sirius's snarl. Facing that swinging, Sirius immediately lifted her left wrist, bringing flames to the swords. However. Sirius, damn half-witch. Emilia, please don't say that anymore. It'll make people feel dirty. Emilia's sword, although bathed in Sirius's flame, didn't vaporize into air. The silver tip of the sword won against the heat, and met Sirius's burning left wrist only. Sirius's chain was also wrapped around it. With a sharp ring, the sword and chain collided with a brilliant flash of mana. After only a moment of contest, Emilia's sword broke with a crisp snap. Sirius, you damn. With a look of glee, Sirius used her wrist to knock Emilia back. If the flaming chain made contact, she would be in trouble. Emilia's beautiful face was about to be deformed, but in that moment. Emilia, ha! Sirius's wrist bounced back up. Emilia's sword of ice had deflected her. Sirius, just die already. Sirius's cries of wrath pierced the air as she swung both arms over her head. The center of the area she was targeting was occupied by Emilia. Emilia's ice blade extended at the hilt, changing shape into a hammer. Sirius met its blow with both hands, retreating, only to be pursued by Emilia. Emilia, ha! Ha! Ya! Sirius, disgusting. Half-witch. Maggot. Fly. Insect. Loathsome bug. Through use of centrifugal force and control over her body, Emilia demonstrated an unimaginable show of combat. Against the ice hammer, the flame-wielding Sirius had been reduced to defense. Looking at Emilia's one-sided attack, Subaru, as an observer, judged that she would triumph. Even so. Subaru, this isn't the time to be in a trance. No, Emilia. Beatrice, Subaru, you can't be distracted right now. In fact, if Emilia killed Sirius, the last death would certainly repeat itself. Although Subaru had foreseen this crisis, Beatrice quickly scolded him. Subaru, wondering what had happened, followed Beatrice's gaze. Crowd, dirty insect. Subaru, crap. The members of the crowd behind Sirius were all flushed with anger. The crowd looked at Subaru and Beatrice, and made cursing gestures reminiscent of Sirius. In fact, they were sharing her wrath. That wave of anger focused on Subaru. Subaru, it's not just sharing feelings, but also doing things like brainwashing a crowd into acting on her will. Beatrice, identifying the situation is good, I suppose. If a solution doesn't exist, then all we can do is escape. In fact. As Subaru groaned, considering his troubles, Beatrice immediately jumped onto his back. The crowd advanced toward Subaru. Subaru, Amelia, help stall for us. Amelia, I won't be too messy about it. Receiving her strong reply, Subaru broke into a sprint, fleeing from the crowd. Fortunately, the pace of the masses who had lost their rationality was far from normal. They chased Subaru with hands outstretched, empty wrath in their gazes, looking not unlike zombies. The main difference was that rather than wanting to eat Subaru, they wanted to tear him apart with their hands. Subaru, if we keep stalling like this, someone could come. Beatrice, even if someone comes, without figuring out the conditions of victory, it would be meaningless in fact. Even if Reinhardt comes, would he be able to solve this, I suppose? Subaru, in short, our worries won't end even if he comes. In any case, the one who could summon Reinhardt, Larkins, was presently part of the crowd threatening Subaru. He was one of the people pushing forward, trying to be the first to reach Subaru. Subaru was uncertain of what action to take before solving Sirius's emotional link. Subaru, so we have to think of something. Crowd, dirty insects. A man leapt at Subaru, who ducked his head and threw himself past his opponent's arms, before sweeping the man off of his feet and sending his body flying. The masses showed no consideration to the tumbling man until he knocked them over. Turning from this bowling-like scene, Subaru spoke. Subaru, they're so angry that they aren't thinking at all. Beatrice, however, that isn't what I would recommend in fact. In such an atmosphere, they probably won't hesitate about killing whatever is near them, I suppose. Subaru, that won't do. He didn't want any sacrifices. The reason why Subaru fought so hard for so many was precisely this. Of course, Subaru understood the scope of his wish. There were many things he wanted to protect. However, there was a limit to how much he could reach. Of course. Subaru wasn't an omnipotent being. Subaru, however, I'm the one who chooses that limit. Beatrice, that's Betty Subaru, in fact. Hearing the greatest possible support from his back, Subaru drew his whip. I'll save as many lives as I can. So please forgive me for any injuries. That was Subaru's train of thought. Aiming at the feet of the crowd, his whip launched through the air. With the crack of a small thunderbolt, the whip hit the stone pavement. Although it wasn't lethal, it was still a weapon and, when wielded mercilessly, could produce an incapacitating degree of power. If maybe, after witnessing that power, the mass of people be cowed into retreating. Subaru, it won't go that smoothly. Then, there was no other way. Subaru swept his whip through the crowd, this time targeting the leading figure. A medium stature, light blue hair, sharp eyes. Wasn't that Larkins? Attacking people who he knew would make Subaru feel sad. Subaru, although this aches my heart, I can't let myself be torn apart either. Sorry, Chin. Larkins, I'm not Chin. Subaru lashed his whip at Larkins's feet and yanked upward. His body spun in a half circle, and he caught the people surrounding him as he fell. The fallen members of the crowd blocked its advance. In order to reach Subaru, they needed to find another route. Subaru, right, they can't think. In that case, as long as I. Just as he was about to say stall long enough, Subaru felt a chill rise on his back. To Subaru, that chill was like the imposing intimacy of his gloomy lover. Even if he were reluctant to meet her, she gave Subaru the help he needed most. They had that kind of complex relationship. That was the breath of death. Subaru, Beastman, you maggot. A large blade whistled toward Subaru, accompanied by a shrill wind. The Beastman had leapt from the crowd, aiming at Subaru's neck. Although he had prominent pointed canine ears, his nose and mouth seemed to resemble the cunning charm of a fox. The half-fox, using his white tail as a brace, was unaffected by Subaru's tricks as he took another heavy swing. Subaru, Biko. Beatrice, Shamak. Beastman. In a serious confrontation, Subaru could be cut down in only 5 seconds. In a flash, Subaru had determined the difference in their power and called Beatrice's name. She immediately realized Subaru's intention and cast a shamak which enveloped the beastman's face. His slender body and large sword were also engulfed by the dark fog, stripping his combat effectiveness away. Subaru, does that cut off the link with the others? Beatrice, there's nothing to that effect, I suppose. Even take the fighting, the link itself did not cut off, in fact. Most likely, that compulsion will stop only taking effect after that freak dies, I suppose. Subaru, what do we do? Beatrice, Betty and desperately thinking, in fact. Solving that mystery was a task best left up to Beatrice. The only thing that Subaru could do was to give Beatrice ample time to survey and think, and to keep the brainwashed masses from disturbing her. Subaru, and on Amelia Tan's side? Subaru turned his gaze to Amelia, who was still busy confronting Sirius. During this year, Emilia had dedicated her time both to learning about politics and combat. Her combat effectiveness was much higher than Subaru's. Even so, Subaru worried about Emilia, not because he thought he was better, but because Subaru was a man and Emilia was a woman, nothing more. Most people would probably dismiss that worry as meaningless. Emilia, ha. Yeah. Ha. Emilia was shouting slightly listless battle cries, but Sirius was ignoring all of them. Emilia spun around, her sword slashing towards Sirius's hand, who whipped her burning chain through the air and knocked the blade away while cursing angrily. With a crash, ice fragmented into powder and dispersed, but Emilia had already formed a spear which stuck upward with its defensive power sending Sirius flying away. She was making use of her huge store of mana, refining the weapons of ice for the purpose of carrying out destruction. Subaru had named this combat technique Arts, Ice Blade, in honor of its illusory beauty which reminded him of an ice fairy from Tales of Fantasy. The wreckage of smashed ice illustrated the intensity of the fierce battle between Emilia and Sirius. Fighting with fire and ice, the fiery heated battle between the two warriors wielding opposing arms continued to unfold on the frosty stage. Emilia, ha! Emilia spun around, twirling her spear at Sirius, knocking her back. She immediately followed up with another blow, lashing out with the tip of the spear. Sirius nimbly twisted her body in mid-air, avoiding her strike and capturing the spear in her grip. Sirius, blazing. Boiling. Burning. My heart is trembling. This is wrath. Emilia, ah. As if echoing her call, the intense heat redoubled its efforts. Emilia's spear was consumed by the blaze as she involuntarily released it, leaving no remains. Sirius, your dirty amethyst eyes, your dirty bell-like voice, your dirty silky silver hair, your dirty fair skin, your dirty cute face. Those all exist purely to seduce men. Ah, such lust. You bitch, you dirty whore. Just die. You just want to tempt men? You want to take that person from me? You filthy slut. You disgusting half-witch. As a wave of heat passed over Emilia's squinted eyes, she once again created a blade of ice. This time, the weapon was a two-pronged spear which held the flames away from her. With an intense grinding sound, the madwoman and Emilia exchanged their gazes. Emilia, my eyes, my voice, my silver hair. All of those came from my favorite person, from the most beautiful person in the world. Treating them as though they're dirty infuriates me. Sirius, fury. Did you just say fury? Don't kid with me. Fury is mine. It's the precious thing that I received from that person. This duty and the name are all gifts from that person. To, without authorization, without permission, take that away from me. I won't allow it. Won't. As her speech came to an end, Sirius's attitude changed dramatically as she cried out in grief. She caught the spear in her grip and snapped it, and Emilia created another sword. But had Emilia been affected by Sirius's cries? Her face, which had previously worn a strong sense of purpose, seemed to have slackened. Subaru, this is bad. After catching a glance of the side of Emilia's face, Subaru's instincts began to scream of bad news. There was no basis. But Subaru was sure. Emilia's expression had changed, that is, had adopted the feelings of Sirius. She was still fighting on, and her movements had not dulled. Even so, that response had indeed happened. Emilia had fallen prey to Sirius's power. However, she hadn't immediately fallen into the palm of Sirius's hand. Emilia, currently in a defensive battle, was still matching Sirius blow for blow. She wasn't as far gone as the crowd, as was just as lovely as usual. Then, inspecting the situation. Subaru, when Sirius first appeared, why weren't Emilia, Biko, and I affected by her emotional link? Just as Emilia and Beatrice had resisted her power just as Reinhardt had. Was there any individual trait, or something similar to that, which they shared? Subaru's initial assumption had been that Reinhardt would be able to resist it just because he was Reinhardt. But if there was in fact a specific reason, then he could start hypothesizing. Subaru, who had seen Sirius 3 times, could now resist her like this. That was also something to take into consideration. If that was the key to a breakthrough. Subaru, BEA. Beatrice, Subaru. The moment Subaru had wanted to convey his newfound realization, an anxious cry echoed in his ears. As Subaru's eyes widened, something collided with his right side. Subaru, go. His body folded into a K shape from the power of the blow, and Subaru immediately hopped to the left, attempting to lessen its impact. As he coughed up stomach acid, he attempted to check the damage the blow had caused. The blindfolded woman, moving like a shadow, had suddenly approached him. That defenseless-looking woman had delivered a rather piercing blow into Subaru's side. Beatrice, Subaru. Don't die, I suppose? Subaru, even I wouldn't reach a game over from that, but that hit was super effective. Although his ribs ached, Subaru judged that his other bones and internal organs hadn't been harmed. He judged that it wasn't too serious. As long as there was no internal bleeding. Subaru, this guy and that guy too, why are these enemies so troublesome? Beatrice, either Subaru looks unreliable just because the enemies are strong, or because he himself is too weak, in fact. Subaru, really, you? His whip bounced as it chased her feet, and as she turned her attention to below her, Subaru tossed a handful of grit in her face. Although it didn't affect her blindfolded eyes, it distracted her enough for Subaru to throw himself at her shoulder. Subaru, my lack of fighting strength seems to have come in handy. If the attack had been serious, I probably would have died on the spot. Beatrice, although I can't say that that's something I'd accept eagerly, that works, since we have more trouble coming up, I suppose. Beatrice reiterated her annoying remarks about Subaru, who breathed a sigh of relief after defeating the blindfolded woman. He tilted his head in a gesture of I'm not listening as Beatrice frowned and gestured with her chin. She indicated the large waterway connected to the square. Subaru, you're kidding me. Subaru moaned as he caught sight of the waterway, where another gathering of enraged people had emerged. Beatrice, Betty thinks that they heard the commotion and rushed over to see what's happening, in fact. Subaru, they entered the scope of her power and were swallowed, are you serious? Is her ability contagious on a wide scale? Panic, fear, madness would be transmitted between people. The feelings shared by Sirius are precisely the result of the factual reflection of that phenomenon. Ah, so that was it. The severity of her threat, her poison which was worse than even Betelgeuse. Subaru, the more you try to flee, the more victims she finds, how can that be stopped? Beatrice, however, something is off about this entire situation, I suppose. Subaru knocked over that woman, and I cast Shamak on that man. Try coupling that with how Tonshinkan's injury didn't appear on anyone else, in fact. Because the situation was pressing, Subaru didn't correct Beatrice's mistake of calling Chin Tonshinkan. What was more, the details that Beatrice had just pointed out could serve as a basis for speculating on the conditions of Sirius's emotional link. Subaru, are we going to have to defeat that whole crowd too? Beatrice, if Subaru has the fighting ability to do that, then we can go for it, I suppose. Betty's Shamak can also lend a hand in stripping their consciousness away, in fact. Although a cruel means, that had indeed been Subaru's initial plan. He could avoid putting himself through unnecessary worry. Subaru needed to avoid the expansion of such a disastrous situation. Now, to act on Beatrice's proposal. Emilia, Subaru, Emilia. Subaru's attention was diverted to Emilia's pained cry. He turned and saw her lying on the slate ground of the square, with Sirius, who was brandishing her flaming wrists, looking down at her. Sirius, growing. Love culminates. That quantity is power. There is love for all. Everyone. Human beings love each other, and with that union, they can share thoughts, they can share wishes, and, be it joy or sadness, they can talk to each other and share their feelings. In that case, this is the inevitable result. The half-witch isn't included in the bond of love, and should just disappear like a crushed insect. Emilia, who had held the initial advantage, had gradually lost her footing until the two were about even. As time dragged on, had Sirius's strength increased, or had Emilia's strength decreased? Whatever the case, this was the situation now. Emilia looked at Sirius with regret. Emilia, something's off. What you're saying is right, but it somehow feels wrong too. Why? Sirius, because you go against the truth. Because you dirty half-being cannot understand love as long as you live, you will not know love when you die. The existence of a half-witch is in and of itself is evil. Even your birth, even the meeting of your father and mother are wrong. The union of trash and insects birthed an unholy dirty combination of the two that needs to end its existence here. Emilia, hook. At the end of that unbearable tirade, Emilia's eyes changed. Kind and gentle as she was, Emilia couldn't face such harsh words, which demeaned not only her existence, but even her parents' meeting. Biting her lip, Emilia pushed against the slate ground, leaping to her feet. Her enraged gaze trained on Sirius, a silvery shimmer gathered in her hand. Emilia. Her sword slashed through Sirius's coat, splitting it wide open. Emilia, in her rage, would stop for nothing as she took another swing at Sirius, her sword of ice reaching the thin body in front of her. Emilia? MMPHM. Subaru saw the chained girl and froze. A blonde, curly-haired girl, bound in the same manner that Luzbel had been, blood pouring from her mouth, sobbed. Her small body was firmly bound to Sirius's. Tina, the name flashed through Subaru's memory. Sirius, the anger in you is scary. Subaru, who had noticed the girl, and Amelia, who saw the girl's tears, were overtaken by rage. And at that moment, Sirius gave her most ferocious smile yet as a wave of heat blew Amelia's body away with alarming momentum. The explosion whistled through the air as Amelia was knocked backwards. She flew across the stone, tumbling until coming to a stop at the very center of the square. Amelia, ugh. Amelia moaned as she writhed in pain. Sirius gazed at Amelia as she lifted her burning arms. Then, she clapped her hands. Sirius, an insect shouldn't give me such a sweet passion. It's incredibly disgusting. Amelia. Sirius, well, thank you. I'm sorry. With her wrists held over her head, Sirius's fierce flame roared once again. Even steel would melt with just a touch of that flame. If it touched her directly, then not even a shadow of Amelia would be left behind. She'd be completely burned from the world. If he didn't act right now, he wouldn't be able to save her. And not saving Amelia was unacceptable. Subaru clearly understood all this, and yet. Subaru, move already, feet. Tina, MMPH. Subaru's feet were trembling with something like fear, leaving him unable to walk. Subaru's inaction had begun the moment he'd rested eyes on the terrified girl bound to Sirius. Beatrice, on his back, was similarly unable to move. Maybe feelings could be shared with spirits. But now wasn't the time to ponder that. Subaru, Amelia. His throat vibrated, but he couldn't even call the name of the girl who he loved so deeply. Amelia certainly couldn't have heard him. Amelia's thoughts as she lay on the stone floor, unable to move, watching the imminent catastrophe unfold before her very eyes. Even those would be scorched by an unforgiving fire, leaving them forever a mystery. A terrifying heat baked the slate ground, and, as the heat wave became the impact, the world was dyed a brilliant gold. Faced with this fantastical scene, Subaru's knees shook, and he collapsed on the spot. Beatrice, Suba, are you? Beatrice, still clinging to his back, called to Subaru in a stuttering voice. Subaru couldn't respond. His line of sight remained fixed on the ground beneath him, as he refused to face reality, swallowed by an overwhelming dread. Right now, if he looked up, he would lose to fear. No, the heart he'd long lost to fear would shatter and break. If he had to see Amelia turn to ash, if he had to see Amelia vanish from the world, then. Beatrice, Subaru. Subaru. Even so, Beatrice continued desperately calling Subaru's name. His head was knocked several times, but Subaru could only embrace his horrified and timid heart, shaking his head slowly. He couldn't. Even if that madwoman were standing right in front of him, Subaru would. I caught up. However, the moment he heard that sound, Subaru's heart shook off that fear. Rather than fear the sight in front of him, he feared being left in the dark. Raising his head, he looked to the direction of the sound, the place where Amelia had been incinerated. There, a man stood. Smoke rose from the charred rocks, which still crackled with heat. In the midst of that destruction, the man assumed a leisurely pose. There, in his arms. Subaru, Leah? In the man's arms, there rested a girl who should have disappeared in flame. Although she had passed out from exhaustion, she was physically unhurt. Amelia had lost her consciousness from the accumulation of her wounds, exhaustion and fear, but she was peacefully resting, safe and sound. Subaru, you. The character who had suddenly appeared and saved Amelia's life. His horrified heart was denying him a celebration of Amelia's safety. Subaru involuntarily voiced his wavering thoughts with a similarly trembling voice. The man who heard and turned around. Then, he spoke. I came to meet her, so it's great that I was able to catch up. Subaru, to meet? What's that supposed to? Isn't it a matter of course that I come to meet a woman who I intend to take as my bride? At that abrupt utterance, Subaru fell speechless. At Subaru's stiff lack of breath, the man, a white-haired youth, laughed lightly. Regulus, I am the witch cult Sin Archbishop of Greed. Regulus Corneas. It was not intended to boast, but rather speak for granted facts. Regulus, as promised, I'm here to take her as my 79th wife. Chapter 25, Leo's Theater. An enigmatic, white-haired youth suddenly entered the barren, chaotic battlefield that had been ripped asunder by ice and fire. His white hair was neither too long nor too short, without any distinct style. His figure was also neither too muscular nor too slim. He had a medium build which gave the impression that he was on the verge of floating away and being swallowed up by the masses. But Subaru, Archbishop of Greed. The mediocre young man's self-introduction left quite an impact on Subaru. As long as Subaru's ears hadn't committed a fatal mistake, then that young man was in fact a sin archbishop of the witch cult. That statement certainly wasn't a lie. If that wasn't the case, then how else could he have been unscathed from Sirius's final attack? Such an anomaly was impossible. Regulus, even so, it's great that I caught up. After all, my bride nearly turned to ash. Even I, who rarely express any particular expectations, do hope that there's someone who can help maintain my bride's humanity. More than that being a matter of merit, I think that it's a matter of course. After all, I cannot commit a perversion of sexuality like devoting my love to ashes. Like this, bringing with him a fear that refused to dissipate, weaving such words about Emilia, the young archbishop who called himself Regulus stood before the quivering Subaru. Although he spoke smoothly and fluently, the contents of his discourse were empty, as if he were just repeating the same joke over and over. Emilia, who was forced to listen to that joke, didn't stir. She seemed to have completely lost consciousness, her slender form only lying prone in his arms. Regulus raised a finger to the white hair on his eyebrows. Regulus, although it's gratifying to see nothing wrong, it seems regrettable that I can't reveal my heroism to my bride today. I think that a heroic rescue in the midst of a dead-end crisis brings people's hearts to a very important place. Well, after all, the combination of the two is already an established fact, and the only question is of the timing. Isn't it great? Subaru, what have you been saying? Regulus, Regulus, who had been speaking his self-righteous truth, discovered Subaru and frowned upon him. He then gave a very tired-sounding breath. Regulus, don't you understand basic concepts like politeness? The first thing I did was give a self-introduction. To ask why you're going to introduce yourself, that's because it's the most important thing to start as a relationship. No matter what kind of relationship, isn't it necessary to start with an acquaintanceship where we both know each other? So, just because I'm someone who cares about such things, I often think that no matter to whom, I will be as friendly as possible. I'm not saying that there isn't a chance that the other party is shy. Even if you think you want to become well-connected, when you start by introducing yourself, something in you always cannot help but hesitate. Out of consideration for those types of people, I try to introduce myself as much as possible and act in order to create a space where they feel comfortable. Of course, I don't expect this grace to be immediately obvious. However, I do have hopes that after some time, they will be able to detect the meaning of an introductions. Or rather, that they will become aware of it. Or is it natural to talk to someone you meet for the first time without introducing yourself? If that's the case, then there's a slight difference between my common sense and culture. In that case, although both parties feel a sense of obligation, it becomes necessary to refuse the other side in advance so as to prevent a misunderstanding. Isn't that so different from what I said before, taking being gentle with each other for granted? In fact, saying so feels impolite. And that's a loss of etiquette, and the other party is left with a lesser value. A false assessment of each other's value imposes on others. This is a violation of the rights of others. From any rational perspective, this is an infringement of my rights. Subaru, sorry, my name is not Suki Subaru. A frenzied look rose in Regulus's eyes as he prattled on, serving as a warning siren to Subaru. Acting on that fear, Subaru trembled as he gave his name. Then, hearing Subaru's introduction, Regulus squinted his widened eyes. Regulus, yes, that's fine. Because giving respect invites respect. Although the conditions for achieving a world that creates both is taken for granted, you don't have to seek the happiness of others. As long as you pursue your happiness, others will also correspondingly find happiness. Don't get caught up in your desires, just accept your truths and feel satisfied with your everyday needs. That is the peaceful way of life. It would perhaps be worth questioning whether or not his smooth speech was serious. But his bright eyes proved that his words neither joking nor ironic, rather, they were his genuine beliefs. Taking his words out of context would perhaps make them seem like Sirius's. In fact, Regulus's demeanor and words held the same superficiality and distortion as those of Sirius. Regulus, after all, is it really so hard to find the proper mood to converse in? Why is it impossible to do this as a matter of course for mankind? Why is it impossible to consciously, unconsciously, indifferently, continue to cause subtle harm to others in the days when such things are done? Subtle injuries hurt, don't they? On top of that, if anything serious works its way in, it might grow into a life-threatening disease. The body and the soul are one. I hate those who misunderstand life to the extent that they unconsciously threaten others. Don't their minds seem warped? Subaru. Regulus, obviously, they're flawed as a human beings, and it isn't okay for that behavior to remain unconscious. It is, of course, wrong to impose a burden on those who are discriminated against. Most people have common sense, but why can't they consciously realize that the world is slowly turning on? Even without realizing that they're trampling upon the hidden hearts of others, if they don't become conscious of their twisted, flawed mistakes, then don't their feet just keep trampling and trampling? As if unhappy with Subaru's silence, Regulus repeatedly pressed for an answer. Regulus's speech was gradually becoming faster and faster, clearly conveying an increase in excitement. Even so, Subaru still could not respond. At the thought of giving a response, his heart flinched. Subaru, all that said, don't you know? Sirius, thanks for the lesson. Burn, scorch and disappear. A cascade of fire poured down from behind Regulus. Sirius had waved her arms to summon a flame which mercilessly consumed her fellow archbishop. Subaru, witnessing this atrocity, found himself once again unable to move. Beatrice, Subaru. Subaru, I know. But, it's okay. Beatrice, also trembling in fear, gripped Subaru's shoulders until they hurt. She too worried about Emilia, who had been caught in the flame. It was impossible for Subaru not to fear the violence that had involved Emilia. Even so, he held a steadfast belief. That was Regulus, I say, to interrupt someone else's conversation like that. How awful are you at reading the mood? If you want to say something, speak up, raise your hand. Do you think I have the presence of mind to just wait for you to speak up? Regulus twisted his wrist, and the vortex of flame vanished. The heat waves dissipated as if dismissed by magic, while Regulus, standing at the center of the vortex, remained untouched. Naturally, Emilia, resting in his arms, was still in the same state. Even engulfed by the flames of that intensity, not a single drop of sweat surfaced on his face. Regulus, you and I share the title of Archbishop. Since I know that your head is messed up, if you'd only made a little mistake, I could have turned a gentle blind eye. Fortunately, there was no harm done. Only. Turning away, Regulus lowered his voice and glared at Sirius, who bore that gaze as she closed her coat, once again hiding the girl bound to her from the surroundings, gritting her teeth all the while. Regulus, you were planning to burn this girl along with me. I would be a little reluctant to say that I will forgive that kind of behavior. It'd be better to say that it would be impossible. Since ancient times, no matter what the story, or the morality of the characters, if one's loved ones are hurt, then their anger is inevitable. Because that is a right that everyone has, I am well within my rights to take revenge. Sirius, anger. Did you get angry? Don't make me laugh. A superficial and insignificant man like you can't speak so lightly about anger. Anger is mine. It's what I got from him, and it's more important to me than anything else. 2. Regulus, oh I see. Are you still clinging to the idiot who kept on risking death? How annoying, how disgusting. That's neither constructive nor rational. Death is the end. This is a matter of course, isn't it? Unwilling to admit even that and clinging to just memories. You really are flawed. If someone who you love dies, find the next one. Rather than yelling about love, exercise the rights you've been granted. Disrupting that natural cycle, you really are hopeless scum. Sirius, you who laughed at that person's death, T.O. speaks so arrogantly. Sirius, who had been relentlessly demeaned, flew into a rage. The stone flooring cracked at the mercy of the madwoman's stomp as she directed her twin flames forward, which flew toward Regulus at an alarming rate. A burning, tearing sound accompanied the weapon on its lethal journey. The chain hit Regulus's flesh, striking his cheek to one side. However, neither Sirius's fury nor the chain's attacks had been calmed by that single blow. Left to right, top to bottom, front to back, Sirius's copper chains beat relentlessly at Regulus's body. On top of that, the chains, flying at incredibly high speeds, projected waves of heat as well. Sirius, disappear, 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 disappear. Turn to ash along with that hateful half-witch. The fence of flame closed at the center, trapping Regulus in that raging inferno. The temperature of that storm was high enough to melt the floor tiles where Regulus stood, and the ground beneath him either evaporated or sunk to form depressions. Witnessing the burning result, Sirius's breaths grew wild. Sharing her wrath, the crowd of wild-blooded people around her bled from their eyes and noses, making strange sounds as they gathered together. Regulus, I say, how many times do I need to tell you the same thing? Regulus stepped forward on the red stone slab as if nothing had happened. Whether it was his white hair, his clothes, or Emilia's arms, nothing held a trace of scratches. Only his expression had changed into one of childish dissatisfaction. Regulus, I've thought about it. No matter how many times the same thing is said, some people can't understand. They don't care enough, give enough effort to understand what is said. Is that contempt? So, whether carving what they've learned in their hearts as commandments, or doing careful self-examinations, or remembering it was food for thought for tomorrow, they don't do any of that. They forget, and it's cleansed away. Saying the same thing over and over again is not only blasphemy, but also contempt, which gives negative impacts to both parties. Both their own value and the value of the other party are fundamentally degraded. That's how it is. It's a form of violence that disregards words and actions. Then I thought of it. Sirius, you damn insect. Regulus, the witch cult's doctrine goes like this: if one cheek is hit, present the other cheek and ask your opponent why they fight as they do. This shows a valuable lesson of mutual understanding. Ah, but I've thought of this too. It's also true that someone whose cheek has been beaten should fight back. That's especially necessary against those who don't know pain. Only listening to the content of that speech would make it seem very stern. But Regulus was a distorted existence. Regulus, who stepped out from the dark, wore a grim smile. That smile was certainly no friendly gesture, rather, it was closer to the licking of a tongue as a predator surveyed his prey. It was still unknown how Regulus had defended against Sirius's flame and chain. Perhaps his power was purely defensive, perhaps the authority of greed granted no means of attack. Therefore, it is clear that the behavior of Regulus should not be conclusive evidence of fatal consequences. But if the battle dragged on, Sirius would die. And there was no guarantee that Regulus was a holder of purely defensive abilities. If that young man pulled anything, there was no doubt that Sirius will die. If that is the case, there is no problem at all. In fact, having the number of archbishops reduced due to infighting would be worthy of celebration. However, although gratifying, Sirius's death would involve most of the people surrounding her. Of course, this included Subaru, as well as all the people trapped in the Sirius's wrath, and certainly Luzbel and Tina, who prayed for one another's safety and sacrificed themselves. Subaru. Even now, fear was spreading all over the Subaru's body. His slack knees trembled so much that even breathing became an abnormal act. But, even in this case. Beatrice, Subaru. In his ear, a weak, unreliable voice echoed. Although the owner obviously could not hide her trembling fear, her warm voice still spoke up from behind him. Rely on me. It was conveying a message something like that. Subaru clenched his teeth and staggered to his feet. He refused to be unable to do anything and delegate everything to the slight weight of the child on his back. Having said that, he wouldn't be able to do anything at all without her strength. Therefore, Subaru refused to struggle alone, but also refused to throw everything to one person. If Subaru had been alone, then he would have remained on his knees. The reason why Subaru could stand was because he wasn't alone. The other people engulfed by the madness were different. Only Subaru had someone close by, only Subaru wasn't by himself. Tightly clinging to that real feeling, Subaru fought his feet. Subaru, Beatrice. Beatrice, I know, in fact. With only a single call, Beatrice could fully understand what he needed. Confirmation with each other was unnecessary. Each of them doing their utmost to accomplish each of their respective responsibilities. As long as they did that, they should arrive at their desired outcome. Whether it be Sirius or Regulus, the cultists had completely forgotten about Subaru. They could only see each other and intended to kill one another. The best result would be Sirius burning Regulus to ash, but that would be impossible. Therefore, Subaru needed to stop Regulus's rampage. Subaru had to attract Regulus's attention to himself and take measures against creating a large number of victims. And, above all, Subaru, stop touching my Amelia. An inexhaustible love pushes the fear from Subaru and lights his heart. If he didn't first address his dishonest heart, then he'd never be able to fight Regulus. At the moment, Regulus's back was facing Subaru, and his attention was being completely diverted by Sirius, which was a great convenience for Subaru. Beatrice, Shamak. As Subaru forced his trembling legs to move, Beatrice began chanting a spell from behind him. Her powerful spell, Shamak, covered Regulus's body in a black haze as it began to sever him from the world, beautifully hindering his pace. Right before Regulus was engulfed, Subaru took a combat position and fiercely whisked his whip forward. He was aiming at Regulus's neck. His whip followed through as it attempted to ensnare Regulus. Surely with this much commotion even the arrogant Regulus would have to attention to Subaru. Perhaps at the point where Beatrice had draped the curtain there was even a possibility that Regulus would fall victim without realizing what had happened. Subaru, there's no response. Beatrice, he's coming. Beatrice's warning had come after a heavy sense of anxiety had already hit Subaru. His whip passed through thin air, and the missing presence of its target was painfully obvious. The next moment, a white-haired youth kicked off of the ground toward Subaru, lunging from the black haze. Regulus, this has been messy from the very beginning. You've been stirring up my smooth life with your magic. Could you evaporate off somewhere? Beatrice, me? No, Murak. Regulus held Amelia with his right hand as his empty left hand suddenly swiped at Subaru. Beatrice immediately gave up performing an attack in favor of casting a gravity-altering spell on Subaru. Subaru immediately affirmed Beatrice's judgment and leapt upward to avoid Regulus's reaching fingertips. Murak is a type of shadow magic with the effect of freeing a physical object from the tethers of gravity. Subaru's flesh was now lighter than a feather. He flew upward, leaving Regulus behind. Regulus, why do you want to avoid it? Subaru, why wouldn't I avoid it? It's scary. Subaru cast his whip at Regulus again, who had looked overhead at Subaru. Rather than aim for any particular direction, Subaru only struck, hitting Regulus's head. His white hair floated outward from the impact and the head that should have been lacerated by the whip was uninjured. The same held true for his windswept hair. Regulus, what if my bride had been injured? Don't you think it's a matter of course that girls should be treated gently, and that it's not something that needs to be taught? Don't you even understand this? Subaru, don't be stupid. The person I want to treat the most gently in this world is that girl. What's with the bride this and bride that you've been talking about? Regulus, it's been decided. It's destiny. After all, I made a promise in my dreams. One hand bracing himself against the wall, Subaru was dumbfounded by Regulus's smiling reply. Something felt awry, but Regulus clearly did not care. Regulus, she will connect with me. That's fate, you know. I feel generally satisfied with myself, and I don't want anything at all. And although I don't particularly desire anything, I'm not so narrow-minded that I wouldn't accept what's given to be. Especially what fate's given to me. Although most people do not expect this, anything within I can reach, I want to guard. That would be myself and the people who are important to me. Subaru. Regulus, I will protect her. I'll welcome her as my bride and love her as she'll love me, and together we'll enjoy a stable life. Therefore, for the sake of that, I won't refrain from exerting the power that I've been given. Subaru, then what about her own will? Obviously, one of the parties hasn't consented yet, so getting engaged like this is rash. Regulus's stern statement had just confirmed his convictions. On one hand, this was a straightforward, righteous, and harmless way of thinking. On the other, it was ridiculous to a deadly extent. It was difficult to explain why it was deadly, but it was something that was clear from the very beginning. Because Regulus had fallen into a frenzy, everything had gone off track. Subaru's voice trembled, but not just with fear. To his question, Regulus smiled and continued as though discussing a disposable topic. Regulus, are you worried about me? If that's the case, thank you. However, there isn't any problem. Fate is inevitable, in particular, in love or friendship, a person's words cannot be established. If fate told me that she would be my bride, then I am fated to be her groom. This is all something that's already been decided. Beatrice, something is completely wrong with him, in fact. Toward Regulus and his flawed theory, Beatrice leaks a subconscious murmur of disgust. Subaru held the same opinion. Regulus used pretty, smooth words to cover up the underlying madness in his beliefs. Subaru didn't even want to know the extent of trouble that those sentiments would bring. Subaru, I've had enough. It's impossible for us to understand each other. It's disgusting to admit that such a horrible person is a rival for love. Subaru removed his hand from the wall and allowed himself to float back to the earth. Looking at the silent Subaru, Regulus nodded as if he'd grasped the main idea. Regulus, I see. I understand. You know, I'm sorry to say, but the fate of a lover can't be shared. I find a bride who admires others to be quite unattractive. Subaru, shut it. Emilia Tan is my bride. I won't give her to someone like you. Regulus, oh, this is Emilia. A lovely name. Very suitable for love birds to softly call, very suitable for this lovable child indeed. Subaru, you don't even know her name, yet you say you want her as a bride? What a joke. What made you? Regulus, her face. Subaru was choked speechless with anger. Misunderstanding his silence, Regulus tilted his head. Regulus, a cute face. That's all love and whatnot is, right? Subaru, go to hell. Beatrice, drop dead, I suppose. Agreeing with Subaru's assertion, Beatrice also denied Regulus his overly casual love. Pedaling toward the ground, Subaru's weightless body was still under the effects of Murak. As Subaru shortened the distance between them as he rode the wind, Regulus lifted his gaze, as if shocked. At this time, Regulus could not understand the implications of a close combat battle. Subaru himself understood. Rather than being unintelligent, Regulus didn't share the familiarity with battle that Sirius did. That wasn't to say that he was unprepared, rather, he needed no weapon. Therefore, getting close to Regulus would be nigh suicidal. Even so, Subaru had a pressing reason to enter close combat with Regulus. Because this was the only way he could use his ace. Regulus, why did you come here? I don't really understand. Although it's not necessary, I do hope that you can tell me. I don't lack thoughtfulness, after all. I want to understand even withering opponents. Subaru, thanks for enlightenment, Biko. Beatrice, ready in fact. Regulus approached Subaru with his left hand extended. Each of those fingers was likely a fatal weapon that would end Subaru's life. Before that could happen, Subaru took a breath and shouted. This was one of the fruits of the efforts that Subaru and Beatrice had accumulated over the course of the past year. Subaru, Regulus, what? The high-pitched chant induced Subaru's damaged gate to absorb Beatrice's mana to cast an exclusive magic of which no one else had yet developed. They had launched the magic of absolute defense, one of 3 original spells devised by Beatrice and Subaru. Subaru's body would be wrapped in an invisible magical field which would allow him to sidestep from this plane of existence, nullifying any attack on him, be it physical or magical. Regulus's fingertips didn't bring any harm to Subaru when they reached him. Upon witnessing this incident, for the first time, Regulus revealed an expression of stiff shock. Subaru aimed at his face and fiercely released his left fist. Subaru, ya. Regulus, hook. The side of Regulus's face was struck. Subaru had struck him with a hard blow, but not the slightest mark had been made when Regulus's head was pushed back. The damage had been completely invalidated. This was what Subaru had indeed expected, an eternal and constant guardian of Regulus's flesh. Beatrice, not ready yet, I suppose. Before Regulus could counterattack, Beatrice shouted that the conditions for the next move had not yet been reached. In this close proximity, Subaru needed to avoid Regulus's attacks. Being on the defense would make each action incredibly difficult. In that case, Subaru needed to give up part of his soul. Regulus, don't worry. Subaru, invisible providence. As Regulus suffered a blow, his words were cut off. That was because he'd been sent flying. Subaru looked over the scene as he coughed blood, roughly wiping at the corners of his mouth with his sleeve. Only Subaru's eyes could see his invisible providence. Subaru could clearly see a black third hand protruding from his chest, coursing with a dreadful power. His entire body creaked, his soul weakened, and something venomous flowed through his body, materializing as black blood in his throat. After paying the price for the ability, Subaru was able to summon a full-out attack. That blow, which consumed so much from Subaru, probably wouldn't match up to a kick from Garfield. Even so, that invisible attack should have a corresponding effect to the effort needed to cast it. Beatrice, Subaru, are you okay in fact? Subaru, cough, somehow. And as for that guy, he's strong, but his attacks are kinda flat. Among all those I've faced so far, it's about the same as Larkin's. Spitting out the remainder of the blood clogging his throat, Subaru pointed out the low energy of Regulus's combat. Regulus had revealed that he was an inexperienced layman who was at most on Subaru's level. As long as Subaru kept his concentration of words, those murderous fingertips could maybe be continually avoided. Beatrice. Subaru's shoulder was knocked. That was Beatrice's silent report. Because of its potent effect, their original spells had short durations. In addition, their spells had daily limits, and overuse would result in loss of potency. Beatrice, although the effects of EMM have ended, in this case, even without magic, Subaru has a chance. So, if you rush in. Subaru, victory could be waiting. I see the light of hope. Regulus, there's no such thing. I apologize for the misunderstanding. I dallied for longer than I should have, being that you're not so interesting. But that's not the issue here. It's not good that we're having a disagreement. This is a violation of rights. Since I've been hit twice since we started, if I don't land an attack, that would be unfair, right? Regulus landed from midair, looking at the determined Subaru. His expression had lost its original calmness and was reaching outrage. Subaru, wah. Regulus, what are you planning? The ground between Subaru and Regulus suddenly ignited. Subaru was pushed backward by the wave of heat which bathed him, while Regulus bore the hot air as it blew past his face. Obviously, the two turned to the culprit for this serious. So far, for whatever reason, the madwoman had not involved herself in the fight between Subaru and Regulus. Although the intent behind her inaction was unknown, Subaru would have preferred for her to have remained silent. Her actions resulted in a very abrupt change. He had no means to combat Sirius's flames and strongly preferred Regulus, who could only engage in close combat. He also had yet to find a solution to defeat her. Subaru gulped as the situation deteriorated. In actuality, his circumstances were far worse than what Subaru had imagined. Sirius, I've found you. Subaru? Standing unsightly, Sirius stares at the two men staring at her, no, at only Subaru. The madwoman had completely forgotten her desire to kill Regulus, merely staring with single-minded obsession at Subaru. Her gaze was filled with madness. Subaru's throat suddenly caught. Then she lifted her previously lifeless, drowsy hands and pressed them to her face. Sirius, I found you. Ah, ah ha ha. Aya. Yes, it's really you. I'm sorry, I didn't notice at first. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. This is great. It really is. Sure enough, you came back for me. Subaru, what? Sirius, darling, where have you been? No matter where I looked, I couldn't find you. Even after I'd torn your spares open, I still couldn't find you anywhere. Even though I'd always been looking. And you noticed how I'd been searching, and you came back. Her high-pitched sonorous voice overflowed with an obvious enthusiasm. Keeping her hands on her cheeks, she wriggled her body, and gave a series of pleased sounds. What kind of state was this? This odd gesture was truly unspeakable. However, if pressed for an answer, her actions seemed similar to the behavior of someone who'd been searching for a lover for a long time. A woman who'd been consumed by blind love. Sirius, because my ideal was reached. Because I want to be one with you, you finally noticed the wish that I'd been praying for. Because my love finally reached you. Subaru. Sirius, I've always been waiting for only you, my dear Petulgius Romani Conti. Speaking with a mad smile, Sirius Romani Conti called the name of her bereaved lover, as she cast a tender, affectionate look at Subaru. End of chapters 24 to 25, Resolution of Ice and Fire.